been a while in the making, and there's two components I want to talk about. One is your law career, so we kind of get that down, and then we'll talk about your community involvement, which of course integrates, but I'm going to split it apart for a second.
Okay.
Because otherwise it could be confusing. Tell me a little bit about your mom and dad.
Okay, first, thank you for doing this. Appreciate it, for my family's benefit to see this at some point. Mom worked at Jamestown Laminated for a lot of years. At one point, she was the only female in an all-male factory, and she was a bandsaw operator. When you look at a Formica top, there's bands on the sides. Mm-hmm. My mother was the saw operator. She had worked at the Worsted Mills like probably 90% of the female Italian women in Jamestown back in the day before that. After Jamestown Laminated, she went to work for the school district. She was a cleaner at Euclid School back in the day, and then she was a cleaner at Jamestown High School. And there's a funny story about that. My father worked at Watson's for, I think it was 39 years. Was proud to work at Watson's and would always tell me that when he came home from the work that day, that his steel assemblage was perfect. He was very proud of being a hard worker at Watson's, and he always referred to the owners as Mr. Braley. It wasn't George, it was Mr. Braley. So I was brought up by both parents to respect authority and respect that you had opportunities and that you should be appreciative of the opportunities you had. They were both happy as larks that they had good jobs.
Siblings.
Brother Sam is currently 75, just had a birthday. He was a school administrator for a lot of years. He was one of the first 5 DeAngelo nephews to go to college. Went to Oswego, loved it, did graduate work, and has done very well for himself. He's got a great family. He married Risha Guzalek in Auburn. He met her in college. She is a Ukrainian. Her mom and dad came from Ukraine. He wears a t-shirt that says, "I don't fear anything because my wife's Ukrainian." He has 2 children. One is a periodontist in North Carolina, and the other child is a CRNA at Sloan Kettering in New York. Done very, very well for themselves. My younger brother, John, is, I'm 67, I think he's 60 or 62 now. He is a Finnish carpenter, very, very good at his trade. And everybody that meets my brother John loves him. John and Sam both have been very big supporters of mine along the way. I didn't have any jealous brothers. I had 2 brothers that were only happy for my successes. And John carries on like the rest of us. We have a strong work ethic. We don't mind working. In fact, we like working. Unfortunately, John's currently disabled, but he worked as long as he could work, plus some, trying.
So there's a gap. I mean, your brother, Sam, 75, you're 67, your other 60...
62, I think.
Yeah. So growing up, I mean, you had, you weren't that necessarily close in school, and
no.
So what was the dynamics at school, in home?
The dynamics of home?
Yeah.
Well, first of all,
3 boys with about kind of 5 years of difference between all of you.
Well, the truth of the matter is, on that point, Sam basically was out of the house and in college while I'm still in elementary school or junior high school. So unfortunately, you don't get an opportunity to be with each other much because you're that far apart. Johnny and I were closer together time-wise, it seemed, and we were there together most of the time. The connecting factor that I haven't mentioned is Nana. Grandma Anzalone was married to Charlie Anzalone, who I'm named after. Mm-hmm. We had the benefit of seeing his naturalization papers that came in from Ellis Island just a month ago. And it's curious because Grandpa Charlie, who I'm named after, was 5'4" and 130 in his 20s, which is surprising. It also noted of interest that his complexion was dark/brown. We all got a big kick out of that. Long story short, Grandma, only talked Italian in our house. So Italian was ever present. My brother Sam was fluent. I was pretty good back in the day. Not so much anymore because I haven't used it. But Italian was prevalent, and Nana was there for us every day while Mom was working and Dad. So Nana was the great equalizer. Nana later had an opportunity to meet my wife. My wife ended up to be Debbie, most important part of my life ever. And she became very good friends with Nana and my mother. I would call her my mother's best friend. Long story short, my mother said if I ever left Debbie, that there'd be no place for me in that house. So I got the secondary treatment, which I deserved, I think, at that time.
And this is all, you grew up in the south side of town, didn't you?
Right.
Whereabouts?
On Allen Street. I call it the upper part of Allen Street, 440. Manly Anderson, early on when I came home, wrote an article, some kind, and he called me Chucky from Allen Street. And I told him I was very proud of that. Those of us that know Manly, he had a sharp wit, and he was a fun guy to be with. I lived across the street from Stravato's. The neighborhood used to be predominantly Italian from the 500 block, the 400 block, and 300 block, which has Fudgies in it, okay? So I grew up around a lot of old traditional Italian people that I always say that if I had robbed a bank, they would have blamed the teller. They were very loyal to their young Italian kids in the neighborhood. My mother grew up on the 500 block, and I've told people a number of times she moved literally one block her whole life, which was not unusual back in those days because people stayed in their houses that they were raised in. And Grandpa and Grandma gave them the house on 440 Allen, and the rest is history.
Not too far away from that was, of course, Sweet Hill.
Yep.
Stuff like that. At the time you were growing up, was there any vestiges of that Swedish, Italian? Did you see any of that?
No. We all played together. I was on Willard Street, Top Park, probably 3 to 5 days a week. If I wasn't at Harrison Field or Rogers School Field or Allen Park, I was at Willard. And none of us knew the difference. Right. I kid with some of the guys now. Craig Lundgren, I've said to him a couple of times, I didn't know you weren't Italian. I thought you were Italian. We just didn't. And our parents never partaked in that. That was a generation almost before them. Right. And my dad and mother never brought us up with talking about what people's backgrounds were. We just never did. So as you were working your way through that, I know that I grew up in Allen Park, and though our paths may have crossed, I think they crossed with my dad more than anything else. And you might want to tell that story just for the heck of it. So I was mischievous like most of us were, but the definition of mischievous young children in the 1960s was a lot different than mischievous in the 2020s. We would carry about and do what we wanted to do in the fields behind Allen Park, etc. And some of those fields backed up into some very nice houses opposite the Allen Park ice rink there, the building. And one day, I was the beneficiary of your father's good advice that I should probably calm down and relax and not be causing a ruckus, young man, very respectful. And your dad, Lyle, and I became dear friends after that, or after that, because never too heavy with a hand, but always saying, hey, understand what's good and what's okay and what's not. And frankly, at those ages, you need that. My dad was one of the owners of Jamestown Electroplating, and when he retired, you gave him a special gift, and I just want to capture that. Yeah, I understand that he was going to retire. You and I talked about it, And I said, oh man, you got to let me give him a gift, special gift, because I understood Lyle was more conservative and a businessman, so he had to supervise staff as a job, as a required performance. So one of the things I thought that no one else, I wanted to give him a unique gift that no one else would give him, is his own Teamster card. So I gave you the card, you framed it, and you gave it to your dad, and I understand his reaction was shock and then laughter. The ultimate gift of a union card, which he never had.
Never. It was a shock and awe, so thank you for all of that. So you are, you get yourself through, now did you go to Rogers?
Rogers?
And then from there Jefferson?
Yes.
And Jamestown High School? Correct. So what year did you graduate from high school?
1973.
So you're a 73 graduate. Did you know where you would go from there?
Debbie and I, my high school sweetheart, started dating in my junior year, I believe. We were together 6 years before we were married, and we've been married 46 years now.
Debbie Mason, by the way.
Debbie Mason, yep. Joe Mason's daughter. She had brother Joe, who we're very close to, and her sister Cindy, who just passed away, that we're very close to. Long story short, Debbie knew I was involved in class activities. I was the president for the, I think, sophomore and junior years, and then I became the school president for the student council in my senior year. So Debbie knew I was involved in those things. I also had drifted off over as part of our projects to the Achievement Center, and we had done work, which is the predecessor to the Resource Center. That was across the street from Jamestown High School. They took over that building for Dayhab, and the seniors in our group, including me, on Joe Trusso's suggestion, who was on the board at that time, he suggested that maybe we help out, and we did all the painting and interior work as high school volunteers. At the same time, so I was active, socially active, but at the same time, I got a chance to intern with Sam Nelbone and Tom Trusso. Tom Trusso Sr. was the Kendall Club Police Benevolent Association president. They let me sit in on negotiations. At 16 years old, Sam Nelbone taught me how to cost out a health insurance contract for a collective bargaining agreement. I'm 16 years old. He put me firmly under his wing. Sam Nelbone had been a directing business rep for the Machinists Union before my father-in-law, and worked with my father-in-law there. My father-in-law then became, as both of them were, a very successful business agent. And I was surrounded by these great mentors. And Sam was critically one of them, so was my father-in-law. Long story short, I was able to learn how to engage in negotiations. I remember sitting at the table one day, figuring, having read the proposals, how far apart they were, but Sam and Tom knew that they were close. Well, it ends up that I watched them settle in the back conference. It was a council person's executive conference room on second floor of City Hall. I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, I think it was Tom, reaches under the table. He's got a brown bag to share a shot of whiskey with everybody at the table to conclude the deal. My other experience was I got to learn mechanics of office issues and how to deal with people in an office as a young boy, and be polite and respectful. Stan Lundeen had a hand in me being involved with the Ombudsman's office big time, and had put me on the Youth Bureau. I was the director of the Youth Employment Service Program with Russ Dietrich. So I had Pat Kinney, Bonnie Majors, Barbara Lundmark, Elaine Pillsbury, Jan Johnson, all the support from the offices. They taught me how to be a good young man in an office setting, which frankly, you don't get it anywhere. You get it from people showing you what's right and what's wrong, and it was wonderful, wonderful experience. And frankly, all of those things adding on your resume help you get into colleges and things. That was not easy for me. I was not a good student, and I had trouble getting into college. You want me to address that?
Please.
So the operative point with my getting together with my wife is that in my junior year, I finally figured out I better do something about being a good student if I wanted to get into college, which I did. So I did improve my grades a lot. However, I can't take a standardized test to save my life, so my SATs were terrible. I got rejected at Buff State, Geneseo, and Brockport. Applied to 3 schools, got turned down all 3. Now what am I going to do? Enter Vic Reinhold and Paul Arnold. They went to see the admissions officer at Fredonia. They went physically to Fredonia to plead my case. They got me in like on a probationary status at Fredonia. By this point, I had matured and got my act together. Went to Fredonia, did very well. And then applied after 2 years of Fredonia to go to the labor school because I had this Joe Mason, Sam Nelbone mentoring background. You know, why don't I go into labor work, especially on the union side? So I went to the interview. My friend, who was a Vietnam vet, went with me. Back in those days, moms and dads didn't take you to college interviews. You went on your own or with a buddy. Okay, my buddy from Ithaca, who lived in Ithaca later, but from Fredonia, who I met at the student union in Fredonia, drove me up, sat out in the hallway. The admissions officer left the door open, which was interesting. And she said, look, you did great at Fredonia. Your SATs are terrible. And frankly, your high school grades aren't that hot either. Why do you think you can do well here? And I said, well, you know what? I grew up. I'm more mature now. I know how to do college. I worked hard at Fredonia, so I know how to do well and do well on tests, etc. If you get me in here, if you let me in, I'll finish in the top 10 of my class, I promise you. She said, really? You're pretty sure of yourself. This is Cornell, you know. I said, that's what she said to me. She said to me, this is Cornell. And I said, give me a chance. She did. My buddy out in the hallway on the way back said, you talked your way into that school. I said, I don't know. He says, I'm telling you, you did great. So we'll see. Well, she admitted me. And I finished 4th in my class at ILR, at the labor school. Like everything else, it's application. I worked nonstop. Because I was in the top 4 or 5 of the class, you get a free ride for your master's. You can do a master's there in 1 year because you've done the undergraduate classwork. The dean of the labor school recruited me to work on a state committee called the Continuity of Employment Committee. So I got paid during my master's to prepare my thesis and produced a thesis on involving the layoff of about 7,200 public employees in New York State under Governor Carey. And I talked about improving the process by which people were retrained or transferred to other places rather than the state paying unemployment for 6 months and then re-employing them anyway. In addition to the increased social cost of employees in terms of alcohol abuse, mental health issues, et cetera, that comes with losing your job when you have 4 children at home. One of the people involved jumped in front of a subway and killed himself out of the layoff. So I learned early on about the significance of work and issues like that. I also had experienced in my youth in Jamestown a serious industrial accident where a gentleman was caught on fire in a local wood plant. And that was about 12 years old at the time. Those experiences of going through, seeing what people live like in a work environment and a risks and safety risks had a big impact on me. Long story short, I get into Cornell, I do well. I've got to take the LSATs, unbelievable. By the way, my SATs, bottom 38 percentile in the country. LSATs, bottom 43% in the country. But I got these great grades. So long story short, I applied to Georgetown. Applied to 10 schools, law schools, got into 7. And Georgetown was one of them. My wife and I married during my master's year. Debbie drove to Cortland and worked on her master's while I was going to Cornell working on my master's. We had a nice lifestyle in the rural area of Cornell. Interesting, it was Monkey Run Road, which was off Turkey Hill Road. They had great names for these streets off the Cornell campus. Long story short, she did well at Cortland, of course. I did well on my master's thesis. I had an oral examination where I had to answer, the question was, what is med-arb, mediation/arbitration? And that happens to be one of the key areas these days of going through ADR, and I'm talking 1978. My bachelor's was 77, my master's was 78. I apply to Georgetown, I get in. Georgetown's a big law school. The average law school, as I understand it, is 150 to 200 people. Georgetown's class, my class, was 500, double the size. It's a sink or swim law school. You make your way by yourself or you don't. Everything's by code numbers. There's no favorites of the professors. You just, when you go take an exam, you're code number 15702 or whatever number you got given for that particular exam. And it was a good experience for me. Curiously, I had 6 classes. I kept bumping into people and asking them if they were in section 2, there were 4 sections of 125. In that class of 125, section 2, I couldn't find anybody that had the 6th class. I went and it was a Tuesday. I told my wife, I don't understand why I've got the 6th class. Nobody else has it. Well, I went into this classroom and curiously, it was me and 12 others, 13 total. And I started talking to the others in the class, and it all turned out that most of them had great grades. Brown University, Princeton, Cornell, great schools, okay? But none of them had great SAT scores, and there was something else or some other issues that made them potentially be students that needed assistance. So every Tuesday I went. They taught you how to outline cases. They taught you how to write good responses, etc. It was, frankly, a very good program. I didn't particularly like being singled out like that because I thought I was very capable and why are you putting me in this special program? But it was an effort to, frankly, increase the diversity at Georgetown. More than 50% of my class entering in 1978, 79 were females. They were way ahead of the curve. And in terms of economics, they paid attention. If you came from a low income or a lower middle income family, you got special consideration from Georgetown because they were trying to have a diversified class. It was a great experience, Georgetown. At Georgetown, I walk into a class one day and early on, civil procedure, first year, 125 people in the class. The professor has your picture and background about you, and it's basically your assigned seats, so they can question you as they deem appropriate. Guess who my professor was? Charles Gustafson from Jamestown, New York.
Really?
He was my civil procedure professor and my tax law 1 professor, and we loved him. Our section gave him a special award as the best professor at Georgetown. He was a wonderful guy to have. Smart as a whip, pushed you along pretty hard. I remember him and the other professors I had at Georgetown. One professor posted a notice when they posted grades that the law students that failed the exam were walking violations of the 6th Amendment. That's how hard they played there. It was a tough school. You either cut it or you didn't. So you better have a wife that understands, because I was studying 24/7. I wasn't sure of myself, to be honest, because I did have problems with standardized tests. So I busted my butt and worked nonstop and graduated cum laude, did well at Georgetown. But without my wife being basically a 100% supporter, she used to write me notes good luck on this exam. I'd wake up in the morning, there's a little note for me to get me psyched up for that exam that I'm walking into. At the end of law school, one of the professors who met us both at the first year of law school, and I think it was when I was on the labor law mock trial team that competed across the country for Georgetown. Long story short, the professor said to my wife, "You still married to him?" Because law school is a very, tough experience on a marriage. Georgetown was good. I taught street law at a local high school. My co-teacher and I were the only white people in the school. It was a center city school, but it was an academic achieving school. They had some ridiculous number, like 300 of their graduates from that high school had PhDs. It was a great school. We taught street law, basic law. I learned a lot by that experience because a lot of the stereotypes you have about different people are all, frankly, stereotypes that we should ignore. The kids taught me a lot about reality and life in downtown DC. It was a good experience. Got on the labor law team, wrote on to the law review, American Criminal Law Review, which ended up to be a saving grace in another way, and I'll explain that. I was at Georgetown. They posted in the Career Services Office, of all things, a clerkship at the Teamsters headquarters. The Teamsters headquarters was literally no more than 2 blocks from Georgetown Law School, which is plopped right down in the middle of the city by Union Station. And the Teamsters building is by Union Station, both in the area of the Capitol. I went and applied, met with a secretary, and talked my way into a clerkship, basically. Became a clerk in year 2. In year 1, I had clerked with a law firm, Cafferty, Jordan, Powers, and Lewis. Mr. Jordan was the aluminum workers union, plate glass workers merged. He was the union rep for Faulkner Plate Glass in Jamestown, New York. I worked with them. APWU was a client. The GCIU, the Government Printers Union, was a client. And I got to work on SEIU cases, including arbitrations and things. And I was a 1L. 1L jobs are tough to get. Got one of them. They helped me get the job at the Teamsters. At the Teamsters, I clerked. And interestingly enough, that was about the time that the Racketeering Act, the RICO Act, became quite the cause celeb in legal circles. The government was looking at a particular local of the Teamsters, and I ended up to be one of the legal counsel at the International working on the racketeering issues involving the Teamsters and basically background support. They had local counsel, and we were involved because obviously it would have grave implications on the operation of the union as a whole. Because I was involved with the White Collar Criminal Law Review, we published a compendium of all white collar cases, which became very helpful, and frankly was on the ground floor of developing the case law on RICO. I had wonderful experiences there. I ended up also being one of the people that wrote decisions for the General Executive Board across the country on inter-union disputes. So where there would be a dispute between 2 unions as to who has control over this segment of the population, either by craft or by geographic area, they would conduct a hearing, they would tell me what their principal findings were, and I would actually draft a decision for them. I also worked on a major class action back then, 1.5 million under the National Master Freight Agreement. It was just a great thing. I also, talk about Jamestown connections, worked on the legislative end of things. The Congress was trying to select people in the Congress. We're trying to change the Landon-Griffin Act of 1959 to further regulate who could be in union office. And they wanted to say that basically in the law that once you were charged not convicted of a crime, a felony, you would have to give up your union office. I did some research, found a number of corporate officials who had the same problem, and I suggested legislatively on behalf of the Teamsters that as long as you put that provision for corporate officers also, we would understand that provision. Well, I don't think it went very far. Part of the process was for me to go to Capitol Hill and meet with the lawyers who were on the committee that had that bill. It was Senator Ted Kennedy's committee. I walk in the office to meet with counsel. I did not know the name of counsel. And I see on his desk the name Forsey. It was Mike Forsey from Jamestown, who was the lead counsel for Ted Kennedy's Senate committee. And it was like, and I'm the lawyer for the Teamsters from Jamestown, New York, and we got to commiserating. It was just a fun time to bump into people. And I've always said, and I mean it, Jamestown people are hard sewn. We're tough. If you put us anywhere, we'll figure out a way to survive. And if you look at a lot of the people who've come from here and gone other places, we have a lot of success stories. And you know, it depends on how you define success. I define it as being happy in the life you're leading. I like the Teamsters a lot. I was there for about 3.5 years. I got great experience. Again, learning to work in an organization. In-house counsel's different. I was in-house counsel, had a French chef that cooked my lunch every day. We had a steam room. I had access to Lexus anytime I wanted. It was a wonderful experience, top end. Anything I needed to make a case work as far as case research, et cetera. There was no limit on the time I could spend on a case. It was a great experience. When I left Greg, the Teamsters, I had a total of 4 cases on my desk. You can be a very, very good lawyer when all you're working on is 4 cases. And I was a very, very good lawyer, you know, working through those cases. I read every day, I read all the updated cases in the labor law field. They allowed you to be a good lawyer, and they expected you to be a good lawyer. At that time, very few people left the Teamsters. There was a transition then. I went through 3 presidents, Mr. Fitzsimmons, Mr. Williams, and then Mr. Presser. When I announced I was going to leave, the Teamster Law Department lawyers had not received raises in forever. And we were doing better than most union in-house counsel, but not well competitively to the people we opposed, management counsel. I got an offer for a $10,000 raise to stay. Talked to Debbie. We had already decided, Dad Mason had passed away, a sudden heart attack in Syracuse at a union meeting. My dad had cancer at the time, and we had a 1-year-old. And we started adding up what mattered to us, and we said, you know what, we need to look. Huh? Jamestown connection again. I'm talking with Patty Fiorello at the time. She's working for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. The key person, she starts out as a receptionist, she becomes the number 2 person at DCCC. Again, a Jamestown person making it work. She had previous contact with Stan all the time, had worked on his congressional campaigns, and knew half the world in the congressional world in DC. She said, you know, Stan's looking for a campaign manager. I said, I'm in, I'm interested. She talked to Stan, Stan talked to me. I get a job for Stan Lundeen running his 1984 campaign. I come home to run the campaign. On the way home, Debbie asked me, we got the U-Haul behind us, and my buddy from Fredonia, Bruce Stokes, is driving the other truck behind us. And my wife says, by the way, do you know anything about running a campaign for Congress? And I said, no, but they won't know unless you tell them. Yeah. Well, sure enough, we dumped the trailers at Collins Avenue off Camp Street in Jamestown because we had bought a house. And next 8 days, I'm going to be gone. I leave my wife with a baby, a dog, and a truck full of furniture for 8 days because I got to get on the campaign trail out to Elmira. My wife said, if you ever run a campaign again, we're done. She didn't mean it, but it was tough because I was gone a lot and we had just come home. Actually, I'm wrong. We weren't on College Avenue. We moved in with her parents for about 6 months, 7 months, then bought the house. That's what happened. So that's another stressor. Now you're moving all this stuff in and trying to live with mom and dad, and all your stuff's in the garage. By the way, as you'll recall, when you get out of law school, there's not a lot of stuff anyway. Yeah. We didn't have much. I think we paid $700 for all of our furniture in our house down in townhouse down in D.C. It was a great time. I ran Lundeen's campaign. Stan was a very strong taskmaster and a wonderful man to work with. Taught me the ropes as I went. I learned early to be as accommodating as I could to the press. Our key was always to identify who was there with the press, make sure they got to Stan right away. That got them done so they could go home and have dinner with their families. It was those kinds of little things that you don't learn in school that you learn from mentors. Pat Breiniger, Michelle Everson were staff people with Charlene Costanzo. We had some interesting times. I remember one episode where the Machinists Union had offered to go to the maximum contribution level in pre-primary, and then maximum contribution level post-primary, which was $2,500 each. I never thought for a minute that Stan Lundeen would be affected by who made campaign contributions to him. I knew better. Stan was an honorable man, and just because you made a campaign contribution wasn't going to affect his judgment on policy issues. He was going to do what he thought was right regardless, and you took him as he came or you didn't take him. Well, the money request came in. They wanted to make those donations. We sat and had a meeting, and one of the people, I won't name who, said, well, you can't take that money. If you take that money, it looks like you're beholden to the union, Machinist Union in particular. We got around the table, and Stan said, Chuck, what do you think? I was the campaign manager, but just an opinion. He says, what do you think? And I said, take the money. We were running against the candidate, Jill Emery, at the time, who was well-financed. And my response about taking the money was, look, we need like $300,000. You never raised that much money before for any campaign. And I will tell you, he was a 5-term incumbent, and there was one of the 5 counties at the time, he still lost. They wouldn't vote for a Democrat if he stood on his head and spun 3 times. So it was not a walk in the park. We were worried. Her husband was connected to the state and a state position, and it had well established in the state Republican Party, so they had a lot of help. So I was worried about having enough money. Well, we had plenty of money, and Stan did what Stan does. He was very well prepared. We prepared 10 questions that we thought would be asked all the time, and we had answers for them, and basically he took charge. It was a great experience. In the meantime, I'm looking for a law job.
By the way, there's a great photo of you raising your hands in victory, which we circulated just recently.
Yep. It's, you know, I'm a young kid. I just got back, and I'm running, and then my candidate wins. That was natural enthusiasm. Yeah. I was so happy that we won. It was like a triumph because, we were worried we were going to lose. And, you learn some things like mailing to absentee ballot, people who have absentee ballots. You learn some things along the way that nobody told you that to expect. And frankly, most people don't come into a local congressional district with experience in running campaigns. So you're learning on the fly, which I did. By the way, the daughter is still the only child at the time, 1 year old. I want to talk about the kids shortly. But I interviewed with Dick Fezenen. Dick had helped me out of a matter where I had a car accident working with the county, and I liked Dick. Dick was a thoughtful, pensive, very quiet, very professional. And I was struck by that. I was 18 years old, got in a car accident. Somebody rear-ended me while I was inspecting a crew. Joe Gerasi, Chuck Propiglia, Joe Trusso, Pete Peterson on the county legislature had hired me to run the Chautauqua County Conservation Corps, CCC. We had over 600 employees. I'm out in the field checking on a crew, and I get in this accident. I meet Richard Fezenen. By the way, the CCC was a wonderful brainchild of Joe Gerasi, Judge Joe, and I worked with him and I learned some very valuable lessons about being a manager and supervising, and we employed 600 people for summer. Those were great jobs, did it for a couple of years while I was at Fredonia State in high school, and that started from me learning to run programs with Russ Dietrich and Bonnie Majors. Jack Fulfer was also a support there at the time in the Jamestown Parks and Recreation Department. I am absolutely a billboard for what a community can do to help a young man out and make him grow. And I can't thank these people enough. I have a whole list of people. I told you I came prepared with a list. I don't know that we'll get to it, but in my handwriting, that's a list of all the people along the way that gave me a helping hand and were wonderful to me during my lifetime. I worked with, talked to Richard Fezinen. He told Kevin about me. Then I met with Kevin Laumer. It was Fezinen and Laumer. Before that, it had been Hartley and Fezinen. And before that, I believe it was Cass and Hartley. The firm's got a long history of success and very honorable attorneys that worked with the firm. Met with Kevin, told Kevin and Richard, you want to hire me? And they said, why? And I said, because I have 101 first cousins. I'll bring in the work. I came with the promise that I would basically be a rainmaker. I would bring people in the door. I had hoped to be a labor lawyer too and do some labor work. Unfortunately, at that time, most unions were spoken for by Buffalo attorneys representing them or local attorneys. John Lemoncuso Sr. had the CSEA unit at the time. Dick Lipsett Sr. had the machinists, auto workers, etc. They were well entrenched. I made no instruction, nobody told me. I made an executive decision that I would never take a client, union client, from another lawyer. I would only take a client on after they had moved on from another lawyer because the lawyer moved on or some other reason, but I would not go after any of the lawyers. And since then, since I started, I've gotten numerous calls from Buffalo unions. You want to do this case or do that case? And I've said no. I think, the bar is small. The union bar is small. I think everybody needs to stay in their own lane and do what they do well. And I think that we had a good bar, so why would I be taking anybody's business? Slowly but surely, I picked up clients. Early on, Dunkirk asked me because my good friend at the time became administrative law judge, Larry Zobel. Larry, God rest his soul, asked me if I wanted to take over the local in Dunkirk, which represented all the city employees. That's how I started. They've been with me 30 some years. I'm proud to tell you I have never been fired by a union. How you do that is you never get involved in the politics of a union. So when the people run for president, you don't take a side. You be an in-house administrative lawyer and you represent the union as an entity, not individuals. And that's worked well for me. I represent now on an as-needed basis that unit still, Dunkirk PBA, Police Benevolent Association, Fredonia PBA, Fredonia Fire, Jamestown Kendall Club PBA, Jamestown Fire, the Corrections Unit in Mayville, the CCSSA, which is the lieutenant level union at the Sheriff's Department, and the Deputy Sheriff's Association. I've completed all of their contracts. I do contract negotiations, which is purely, frankly, ILR labor school stuff. Most lawyers don't necessarily negotiate labor contracts. More often than not, it's a labor representative and a personnel manager. But in this model, the unions were happy to have a local union lawyer in Jamestown, New York that they could get access to. So I stayed in my lane in Chautauqua County, and that became frankly, that's my hobby. Everybody thinks that you roll in dough because you represent unions, etc. That's not true. That part of the Pheasant and Llama DeAngelo business is a small percentage of the receivables. The truth of the matter is that my partners, Llama, Pheasant, and now Dan, Mary, and Galena have allowed me to have this practice, even though it doesn't reap a lot of money, but it reaps a lot of joy. I love it. I tell everybody that like me or don't like me, I come with 2 scarlet letters on my forehead, one for Union, U, and the other one for Democrat, D. I've been involved with the Democratic Committee for a lot of years, and I'm proud of it. I'm a helper. I've never run for office, but I've always been the guy behind the scenes helping if I could. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. I do want to talk about my family.
Please.
Kara, I was born with, lived with 3 boys. Nana was there, of course, with Mom and Dad, but I know nothing about daughters. And Kara came along, and I got to tell you, the sun, the moon, and the planets all aligned. And then, after Kara, Jonathan and Matt came along, and I can't even begin to tell you, my heart right now is going pitter patter. Those 3 kids are the best thing that ever happened to me, aside from my wife and my family, my extended family, my parents and my brothers. It's just, I know because your kids and my kids were about the same age. It just can't be described. Debbie and I had been told in Washington, I went to a fertility clinic, funny story there, it was in the Watergate building. They had plumbers there too, apparently. Long story short, I was told I couldn't have children. Debbie had serious surgery while we were at Cornell. She was told she couldn't have children, female-related surgery. So we expected we weren't going to have kids. Along comes Kara, despite that warning. Then Jonathan, and then Matt. And it's like, well, you know what? I should have known it's in the province of God in the first place. We can make all kinds of plans, etc., but God knows what's going to happen, and we got blessed. Kara now is an attorney. She practices out of a Buffalo office, but she's living in Atlanta. A lot of kids practicing law today practice remotely, which is still foreign to me, although I did it during the COVID. I was the one person that would come in the office and check the mail, but more than anything, I was working out of home, as were all of our staff. They all had laptops home, and we worked, we never closed down, but nobody was in the building. Jonathan got his bachelor's and MBA from Stetson, and has worked for a major corporation now for 10 plus years. They asked him if he would be committed to staying the course with the company, and he told them up front, you take care of me and I'll take care of the company. I'm happy to be, I don't want to move around, which was not typical of his age group. They did a lot of movements. John hasn't left that job in 10 years and has no intentions of doing that. He hopes to stay with them forever. It's a big company called Brown & Brown Insurance. He's an IT techie, real good background in IT from Stetson, and he's been very successful. Matt has done very well too. Matt stayed in Tampa for a while. I had a career there in sales. Matt's always been a people person. A job came up with CSCA out of Buffalo to work in the region. In particular, they were looking for someone from Chautauqua County that knew Chautauqua County. I called Matt, as I know you've done over the years, and said to our kids, listen, there's this perfect job that you would fit if you want to do it. I'm not going to make you come back from Tampa unless you want to come back from Tampa. The boss in Buffalo called me before he interviewed him, and I said, look, I'm going to tell you, the kid's going to be aggressive. He'll be able to explain to you what labor is about, etc. In the meantime, my son had helped me because he's very computer literate. He had done salary comparisons for the Jamestown police contract for me, had done some UCJS, Uniform Justice Center, statistical research on crimes in Jamestown and Chautauqua County. My son had worked in the area with me like an intern in the office, so he had some background. My son Matt does the interview. There were like 12 people that interviewed for this job because they're good jobs and they're interesting jobs. my son gets the offer, and the director of the office calls me later and says, "Your son came as advertised. What an interview. He did a great job." And I told my wife when I got home, I wasn't surprised. About 6 months ago, my son came home and said, "Guess what I did today?" And I said, without naming names, I said, "What'd you do?" And he said, "I negotiated health insurance benefits for bus drivers that never had health insurance benefits through the employer." And I said, "Matt, good for you. That's great, great job." Matt leaves, and I said to my wife, "Does he get it or what?" I mean, he was brought up. Grandpa was a union person. Mom was in NICET. Daddy worked as a lawyer for unions. He gets it, and he likes the job, and he likes the people. You gotta like doing it. You gotta like being a problem solver. All three of my kids have excelled. When I got sick, my kids were basically in my lap. Obviously, they were surprised because to my children, Dad was invincible. So it was quite a shocking experience that I was as sick as I was. To look at your kids, it gets me upset. Eyes, and to see how it upset them that I was that sick reflects the measure of your love for your kids. Because you always protect them from everything, and here I was in a position where I couldn't. It was a tough time. My wife spent 81 days at Roswell in 2022. My wife was there every day. You can only designate a couple of people, 2 people. So at the time, all my kids, except for Matt, were away. But there was a level of importance about the special person I wanted to designate. Told the kids, "Look, you know who I'm going to designate besides the 3 of you." And they all called it Dr. John. So Dr. John Lamancuso is a dear friend. John and I have experienced our professions together in taking care of people in Jamestown and being very proud of it. We are happy. We're both happy we came home like you. And we take very seriously our responsibility. It's not uncommon for him and I to talk at 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night or 6 to 8 o'clock in the morning because we're working. And that includes weekends. That's just his methods and my methods. We have a strong work ethic. We're not workaholics in a traditional sense, even though people want to call you that. We're responsible professionals that understand what our responsibility is, and we have to do what we have to do to keep up. A lot of reading, a lot of studying, and then you get to meet with the client for an hour after you've done 4 hours of research. Same with the medical profession. So John was there every step of the way with the support of his wife, Rhonda, too. Even when he was away on trips, he was calling me to make sure everything was okay at the hospital. I got over 400 cards from members of this community. Unbelievable. I can't tell you how heartwarming it was and is. I went back through my cards this last weekend just to make sure I saw everyone's name that had given me a card, because there were periods in the hospital that I didn't even know my name. That's how sick I was. For those that don't know, I got diagnosed with leukemia in May. I went to Roswell on John's recommendation right away, got in within 2 days. Doctor told Debbie and I had a month to a month and a half to live if I didn't do chemo. I said, well, that's easy. Give me the chemo, because I'm not prepared to leave my wife and my children and my grandchildren, let alone my brothers and my family, extended family, and my family at Pheasant and Lawmer and DeAngelo. By the way, my partners here didn't miss a beat. They took care of me and made sure I got paid every week that I was gone, and I was out of commission more or less 8 to 9 months. They took over all my cases. None of my clients had a problem getting their work done because they took over, and I had a lot of open cases. I tried to do what I could out of Roswell. I did work out of Roswell. The doctors thought I was crazy, but I actually did what I could with a laptop. But I'm talking 2-3 hours a day, maybe I had the energy. They tried the chemo, 2 different courses. I failed both. Now, the end is near because the doctor had told me if I didn't do the chemo, I'd live about a month, month and a half, and I was well into the month by then with the chemo. So I said to the doctor, is there anything else you can do for me? Give me a shot here. And he says, well, there is. There's something we've been doing. I've now learned for about 2 years at Roswell. There's about only 50 patients that have had it. It's called CAR T cell transfer. It's immunotherapy. I went to the hospital, sat in a chair for 4 hours, and they took cells out of my body. I'm not exactly sure how they did it. At the end of the 4 hours, there was a nice nurse with a cooler, like a 6-pack cooler, waiting for this bag of cells. They gave her the bag of cells. They promptly flew them out that night from Buffalo to Santa Monica, California. The lab in Santa Monica re-engineered my cells. I told the doctor, you have to understand, I don't understand all of this. You're talking to somebody who flunked biology. And I said, this kind of high-level engineering, biological engineering is way over my head. And he explained it to me as best he could. I then waited, I think, 2 weeks. And within 2 weeks, I was called to come in. The cells had arrived, the re-engineered cells. I sat in a chair for 12 minutes total. They put the cells back into my body through my arm, through a port, and I started a recovery. In the last 4 months, I've had 3 bone marrow biopsies. All of them show 0 cancer in my bone marrow or my blood. It is a blessing from God. I can't tell you, God and Jesus, how much I appreciate what you did for me because I was right up against it. I since have also had, as part of that, fluid taken out of my spine because sometimes cancer hides in the spine. That was last week, and again, no cancer was present in my system at all. It's unbelievable. I got another shot. If God forbid this doesn't work, there's bone marrow transplants available to me. I asked him why don't we do that now? And he said because the CAR T is working. My partner DeAngelo did some research in the medical journals, and the consensus is if the CAR T is working, you don't need bone marrow transfers. Just let it sit because you're already ahead of the game in terms of a remission. They call this a remission. It's not a cure. So someday I may need the bone marrow transplant for a cure. All 3 of my children were the first in line to say, take our bone marrow. Whatever you need, Dad. It was another tearjerker that people were lining up. I do want to make a pitch real quick. If you ever have a chance to donate platelets to Roswell, that would be a wonderful thing. There were at least 1 or 2 occasions where I needed platelets because my numbers were so low. It went down like 17 and now it's like 170. There were no platelets to give me. I had to wait till people donated, and then I was able to get the platelets. And it's a scary thing when you're at Roswell and they tell you honestly, look, this is post-COVID. People are still a little skeptical about going into hospital settings when they're healthy. And frankly, you can't blame them. But if you can donate organs, donate platelets, man, that's a good thing for people who need, like me. I have 6 grandchildren. Kara has 4 boys, 11, 9, 7, and 5. That's Andrew, Cameron, Alex, and Colin, who, like the other 2, are the light of my life. I love being with my 4 grandkids. My son-in-law, Nate Hillberger, and my daughter are wonderful parents who are at every beck and call with the kids. They're raising the kids like they were raised in Jamestown. They're very involved in baseball, football, and community activities. They take the kids to church every weekend. They go to Sunday school like we went to catechism. It's kind of interesting to watch because you're reliving your life. Jonathan married a nice gal from Krakow, Poland, Angie, who is sweeter than sweet. Self-made woman, has made her way on her own her whole life with John. Great couple together. They do work great together. They were told that they might not be able to have children, and they have 2 children, Stella Grace, who's 3, and little Charlie, who's named Charles DeAngelo, after me, of course, and Grandpa Charlie Anzalone. Those kids are just a ball. I can't wait to get my hands on all the grandkids. Stella is special, no question about it, the only girl in the family. But all the boys, you look at their character, they're all individuals and special. We send the kids treats in boxes from through the mail, things we buy here, etc. And it's always fun to watch them. You know I collect baseball cards. So I bought each of the kids wax packs, the boys, where they could open the packs and see what cards they had. And we bought them the albums with the plastic inserts to keep their cards. So they called us on Christmas Day, and there they are, spread all over their beds, opening their cards. And they had lived in Milwaukee and Madison, so we got a Brewers fan, we got a Yankees fan, and we got other fans of. They're mostly Milwaukee and Yankee fans, and they're Buffalo Bills fans. The grandkids all dress for the Buffalo Bills games in Atlanta and in Richmond with Jonathan and the kids and Angie and the kids. It's a sight to behold. Matt has a close friend, partner who we love, Lindsay, very much. And it's been wonderful to watch him grow up too. Our daughter's going to be 40 this year. It's kind of a, where are you, Chuck and Debbie? Well, Debbie and I are 67 and 68 respectively. We've had a very good life, which gets me to the point that I wanted to make. God owes me nothing. I've had a very, very good life. Obviously, it starts with having a wife that is second to none. My wife holds me up by both elbows. Most people wouldn't think that. They would think that Chuck is the tough guy and holds things up and keeps things together. That's not true. In our household, Debbie's the chief, and she always has been, and it's been, frankly, a wonderful thing because, we can't do everything because we're working, etc. Debbie also had the wonderful experience of being accepted and a part of the Panama Central School District. Best thing that ever happened to Debbie and Chuck DeAngelo was the Central School District. I'm going to tell you a secret that most people don't know. My wife never cashed a check for 20 years from Panama Central School District. Never one. Every check went into a savings account for the kids' college. Because of my wife, we were able to pay for college cash. Contrary to everybody's belief that lawyers roll in dough, we can make a good living practicing law, but $300,000, which is what I estimated we spent on the 3 kids and their schooling, tough to come by for lawyers, anybody. We had it because Debbie, except for 1 year, we were able to pay out of cash because Debbie never cashed a paycheck. She's a special person. We also bought a house 36 years ago, and we're very happy to live in Jamestown on the top of Camp Street in a very nice, I'd call it a nice average ranch house in Jamestown, New York. Lucky, lucky, lucky. That's how I look at it. We've been brought up by families that didn't have a lot. They took what they had and did the best what they could with what they had. And I comment all the time, if you wonder how tough Jamestowners are, I want you to take a look from Brooklyn Square up the hills. And I want you to look at where they built the houses when the Swedish immigrants and the Italian immigrants moved here. Look where they built their houses. They built their houses on the river. They built their houses on the hills that, frankly, most people couldn't traverse on a good day. And they went and they made their way every day by going to work every day, no excuses. I brought my kids up that way. My wife was already wired that way because of her family. I was wired that way because of my family. And if you want to thank anybody, you look at all the people who kicked in addition to people. There were people that you and I had experience with that nobody really, not nobody, but a lot of people don't know about. Gene Johnson, Wally, and Ivancic at the Ellen Park. Paul Spitali at the Parks Department. These are people you and I have known for years. Pat Kinney, Tom Trusso, I mentioned, Tony Lavoie, and Art Very at the Y, Boys Club. I had contact with people at the Y too, but the Boys Club is where I lived, okay? And I'm happy to be on that board because of it, frankly. Joe Gerasi, I didn't mention George Ritzer back in the day, teaching me along the way about being fair to hiring all kinds of people, not just some people. Gert Spitali. Gert was the Ward 6 Council Democratic chair. She took me at 14 or 15 years old, made me a committee person on the Democratic Party. First thing I did was I set up a suggestion box for anybody that lived in the 6th Ward at Sandy's Grocery. And Sandy's Grocery let me have a Democratic committee question box. I had high school teachers, some of which you had, that, I mean, talk about role models and encouraging me. My mother was the cleaning lady at the high school. I wasn't without my blemishes, by the way. I was a little bit rough around the edges. I got suspended 3 times at Jamestown High School. Twice for smoking in the bathroom. And it was one of our teacher friends that you and I love for both of those incidents. It wasn't hard to tell I was smoking. You could smell it in the hallway. I don't know what I was thinking. By the way, I petitioned the school board back in the 70s to have a smoking lounge for students. That's how politically inappropriate I was. And then I got in a food fight in a cafeteria. My punishment for that one was I had to clean the cafeteria at Jamestown High School for, I think it's 5 days a week. Guess who the cleaning lady was that I had to work with?
Your mom.
My mother. My mother was so upset that her son was the one causing the trouble, but she understood. I was just a little wild around the edges. One of the other times when I got suspended, Mr. Dietrich put me to work at the tot lot across from the main playground at Allen Park. It was Kurt Johnson's Memorial Park. Also a fine gentleman, Department of Development leader for a number of years. Steve Carlson went out of his way with me too, by the way. Long story short, I pulled weeds with pliers and various devices to as my punishment, but keeping me busy so I wasn't sitting home loving watching TV as opposed to being suspended in a detention room. Bob Doverspike, Joan Houston, Joan Bonfiglio at the time, Victor Reinhold, Paul Arnold, Mrs. Rudy from Rogers School always watched out for me, Mr. Summers, Carolyn Seymour, Lynn Phillips. I could not read in Jamestown High School. I had trouble reading. Lynn Phillips took me in on a remedial project, which ended up to be my saving grace because ILR stands for I Like to Read. The books were this high your first year at Cornell's Labor School. If I couldn't read, I would have been in very, very deep trouble. Long story short, Lynn Phillips took me through this colored programmed reading program where you start with black and you work up to yellow or green or whatever. And I became a very good, strong reader with strong comprehension skills. He worked with me for a whole year. Before Mr. Phillips passed, I had the opportunity to go to his nursing home and personally thank him for what he did for me. These people always would bump into me. Mr. and Mrs. Kurtzall just sent me a card worrying about me. They're proud of their students that do well, and they couldn't wait to go out of their way. Wally Hucknall was always proud of me about doing well and say, they say those things to you too all the time. This is a special place. Clayton Berlinghoff, Rogers Schools, got me started in student council. Mr. Maurer, the principal at Jamestown High School, helped me. Mr. Joy was a wonderful guy, principal also. Mr. Joy called Debbie and I. He caught me kissing Debbie in the annex building behind the stairs at Jamestown High School. We had some great times too. Obviously, like a good husband or boyfriend at the time, I took the fall for the crime. I told Mr. Joy it was my fault. Mr. Joy was a wonderful man too. I know I haven't named everybody, but you could take the whole of Jamestown High School, Jefferson, Rogers, Allen Street people that lived in Allen Street, and all my aunts and uncles. There were 10 brothers and sisters on my dad's side, 3 sisters on my mother's side, and all of Debbie's aunts, as a matter of fact, aunts and uncles. They supported me 100%. It's a wonderful place to be where you and I are in Jamestown, New York. I can't thank people enough for supporting me. None of this would have happened without all those people, ever, ever, ever. One last point, I was 16 years old. I woke up in the living room on the couch. I sat up, saw the Stravato sign, neon sign lit up, and something hit me, and I said to myself, I'm not doing this. I'm getting out of here. I'm doing better. I'm gonna do something with my life. I can remember it like it was yesterday. I don't know what happened. I think it was my grandparents' spirits coming back and saying, hey, what are you doing with yourself? What are you doing with your life? Once I made that decision that I was gonna move forward with my life, and no matter what, I was gonna be successful, if you look for help, it's there. Jimmy Carter signed the bill extension. I would have never finished law school without Jimmy Carter's bill extension of the National Student Loan Program. I borrowed a lot of money. I tell kids this today, would you borrow money this much to make this much over your lifetime? The answer is yes. Do what you got to do to get to college. I understand that college isn't for everybody, but I'm going to tell you, Cornell, Fredonia, Cornell, and Georgetown opened a lot of doors for me too. I think that college is not a bad idea for many people. I think you do what you can with what you got, but the more you encourage yourself to succeed, the better you'll do. As simple as that. Now I think it's my responsibility, I know it's yours too, because you do it all the time, to encourage as many people we can. You know, I'm a big supporter of the Jackson Center. I think the number of kids, for example, that have gone through there in internships is a classic example of the model that Chuck DeAngelo got to benefit from. All those little internships end up on those kids' resumes. They go to college at Duquesne, and they mention the Robert H. Jackson Center. I'm telling you, those things open doors. The CCC opened doors for me, that I had worked on an employment program like that, and I'm going to a labor school. Then, you know, you tell them what other things you've done as, you know, leadership and the people you had around you. It opens doors, and nobody's better than you in terms of looking for opportunities based on what people relate to. And people relate to what you've done and what you've accomplished and what for example, the Jackson Center stands for. We're happy to have Justice Jackson hanging here. One of the board of directors gifted it to our law firm, and you see it's surrounded by all the lawyers' pictures from every 10 years we do an update of the pictures. I'm proud to be a member of the bar. Last point, I never, ever in my wildest dreams before 16 years old, you asked this question at the beginning, so I'm coming back to it, never thought I had the ability to be a lawyer. Because of all the encouragement and then successive successes as I went ahead and applied myself, it became a possibility. Last, I'm a lucky, lucky man that I got this opportunity to practice law in Jamestown, New York. Helping people absolutely floats my boat. It's what makes me happy every day. I like taking the calls. Obviously, a lot of the calls you can't do much with, or financially they can't afford to hire you, but you can still help people, remembering why we're here, and that is to serve the needs of other people. Thank you.
Well, you're remarkable, and you've spent a wonderful period of time recognizing those people who have helped you. But at the same time, as I'm looking at the Post-Journal headline of last week, DeAngelo received dual honors for community service. And the flip side is that which you've given back. You've invested in the same community that has invested in you.
Yep. Yes. It's a labor of love, number one. And number two, it's an ozy. I owe it. There's no question about it. This community, what they've done for me, the least I can do is help out with those activities. Boys Club is near and dear to my heart. I mentioned it before and I'll mention it again. We can go anywhere and work with anybody and not-for-profits. Hunter's Hope was happy to have me on the board of directors. It was, again, a labor of love because Jamestown people are motivated to help people who are disabled. With the Resource Center, the Prior Achievement Center, et cetera, those seeds were sowed with you too. You and I, we see people with special needs and it's like, of course you would do that. And the other part of Jamestown, and I'll tell this story, we don't brag about what we do. I appreciated those awards very much, but absent being asked what I've done, I would never tell everybody all the committees I was on. My kids didn't even know I was on the Hunter's Hope Board of Director for a number of years until they invited us to a symposium at Jim Kelly's house out in Ellicottville, and they wanted us, the board of directors, to bring their families because the other Hunter's Hope, Krabbe disease, leukodystrophy families from around the country were there. Again, basic values. What are you supposed to do? You give back what people have given to you, and I hope I've done enough. I still think as long as the God allows me to stay here, there's more to do. Still working with the Boys Club Board big time. Very committed to that. And Debbie and I were talking as recently as this weekend, other things we might try to do. I got a call from the Babe Ruth World Series committee. Can you still do the H. James Abdallah box seats this year? Absolutely. We're going to be doing that mailing shortly. So it's not done yet. Got more to do.
You've got a lot to do, and it is such a thrill for the community who will watch this to see the fighting spirit and how you take in what most people could defeat them. The news of leukemia, the news of, I'm sure you went through all of a sudden for the first time a sense of mortality, which we will all face, but you faced it head on and had the unique perspective of letting the community know through open letters on a couple of occasions, which is frankly a wonderful model for somebody else to use in the future. I mean, you've broken, as you have in many spaces, many grounds, at many locations, but facing the life and death decisions that you had to make and sharing that was remarkable.
Wasn't sure about it, I got to tell you. I wasn't sure what to do or say, but I thought that hiding it was not appropriate. I also thought that the letters might give other people some sense of what goes on, because I wondered too, what's chemo about? What happens? How do they treat you? What do you all those things. And I thought, what, tell people, that way they know. I also thought that communicating that to hopefulness to people who are otherwise, there's a lot of people sick in this community with cancer, and being silent didn't sound right to me, because frankly, even the time I was in the hospital, I bumped into two other people that I grew up from Jamestown at the hospital at Roswell. It's a prevalent, cancer's prevalent. It is what it is. I think the biggest issue with the letters was I also needed to get settled, that I was going to face what I had to face. I was going to fight it tooth and nail, which is it's a character issue. I'm not going to give in. I mean, when God tells me it's time, it's time. But in the meantime, it allowed me to get settled. And I will tell you, over the years, I've counseled lots of clients. I've been surprised coming in to get wills and things done with the imminence of cancer and passing stage 4 cancer. And I've always been surprised at how they seem to be settled. They talk to me very matter-of-fact, business-like about their wills, even though they know that this impending potential death is facing them, okay? I wanted those letters, and I want to convey too, when you go through the prospect that you're going to die, when they tell you, God forbid, you're only going to live a month and a half, it is terribly shocking, terribly upsetting. Went through all of that. And then you become settled. I'm surprised to tell you that I am comfortable with the fact that I may pass still. The CAR T might run out, bone marrow might not work. I'm hopeful that it's going to work, but if it doesn't, I said it from the beginning, God, spiritually, I'm very settled. I think God owes me nothing. I've had a great life. I've tried to do the right thing by people as much as I can. Not perfect, I'm not perfect, but I've tried. If I go, I believe that there's eternal life. And I accepted Jesus in my life a long time ago, probably first grade when I was going to catechism for the first time. So I'm ready. And I never thought I would be able to say that to you, but I would say after the first month I was really, even earlier, I was real comfortable doing it. One last shout out. Roswell people, oh my, they took good care of me, Greg. Those people, the staff nurses, of course, have you on the ground floor doing everything day to day. Nurse practitioners, PAs, doctors. I had the pleasure of having Dr. McCarthy and Dr. Green. Dr. McCarthy is a 68-year-old, our age, who was the former chairman of the transplant unit and is still working like us, okay, because he's like us. Keep working because they like working, okay? He's good with people. Dr. Green is a younger fellow. He coined a new medical term. Dr. John said to me one day when he said, you can get through this. And I said, why do you think that, doctor? And he says, because you're sturdy, I can tell. Dr. John said, that's a new medical term, but I know what he means. And he says, you can get through this. Attitude's everything, Chuck, Dr. John said. Keep your attitude that you're going to fight, and we'll get you through this. They kept me getting out of my bed. I did 810 laps on one occasion in one of my stays around the unit to keep in shape and to fight back mentally and physically. That's the attitude that they foster at Roswell, and it gives you a fighting chance. Sorry, I don't mean to keep going.
I'm delighted. This has been wonderful. Thank you, Chuck, for sharing all that.
I thank you for giving me the opportunity. I want my family to have a chance to see it when it's appropriate. Now or then, it is what it is. I'm happy to. I need to say thank you to everybody that helped me, and you gave me a chance to do that today, so thank you.